I'm here with Allison Gilbert, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and one of the most influential writers and speakers on the topic of loneliness and creating connections. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's such an honor to have you.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Yes. So I want to start off, obviously you're here to do this course for us all on this idea of connection and overcoming loneliness. And I'd love to begin, if you don't mind, by just how did you get into this work?
Oh, it was such an honor. I was given the most incredible assignment from the New York Times to write an article about Dr. Ruth Westheimer's quest to become New York State's first ambassador to loneliness, which was not only the first role of its kind in New York, but it was the first role of its type in the country. And she was ultimately successful, and she became New York State's ambassador to loneliness in November of 2023.
Amazing. And so then you got to work with her, and that got you onto this work, and you continue to do that.
Correct. So then we co-authored The Joy of Connections together alongside her publicist of more than 40 years. And together we put out The Joy of Connections, and it came out in 2024.
Such needed and special work, especially because in 2003, you as Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, declared loneliness an epidemic, is essentially right where we're at. And I imagine that COVID definitely played a role in that. But I'd love for you to speak and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you find contribute to that. Just this epidemic that we're dealing with, this loneliness that people are experiencing that affects them in so many ways on a health level. What are some of the main culprits, I guess, that are causing this?
Well, COVID definitely exacerbated certain problems pertaining to social isolation, but this has been a creeping real challenge for a very long time, also exacerbated by the advent of social media. There's been a great term that I like to crib and borrow, that we have become really used to having junk friends, like junk food that's not really good for us. We got to pay attention to our nutrition. We don't want to eat too many donuts. We don't want to eat too much pizza, like even though we really love it and it feels good in the moment. It's the same thing when we're scrolling or we collect friends on social media. Those sometimes, not all the time, right? Social media can be a tool to deepen connections. And of course, we're going to talk about that as well. But think about the junk friends. And are they taking up space for what could be more meaningful connections? And so COVID, definitely a contributor for sure. Social media, definitely a factor. But these trends have really been growing over time.
You mentioned this idea of the social media component of it. And it's interesting for me, I grew up, Facebook came out my freshman year in college. So I had like a childhood experience without it, but then I've really witnessed my continued adulthood going into adulthood. Social media became such a key piece of how people communicate. And it's interesting to be on the cusp of that because I feel grateful that I got to experience some of those true connections beforehand. And I've seen the positive pieces of social media, but I've also seen for sure and felt those negative sides. I'd love to hear more about how you've seen the shift in that. Like being in the online world, is it possible to create true connections? And is there a positive piece of that? But then of course, the shadow side of that, the negative piece as well.
Well, I'm going to answer your question or your statement like this. I love chocolate cake, but I can't eat it every single day, the biggest slice, right? You want to control your portions, how much sugar you eat. And I think it's the same as social media. It is a tool that we can harness in its best form to nurture in-person connections. But of course, we can abuse it the same way we can overeat. I mean, this is something that I have struggled with my entire life, wanting to have perhaps more than you should of like a dessert or a carb or what. Like we all have to monitor ourselves and build the habits that are going to be healthful for us. And I think when it comes to social connections, if we can use social media and not have it use us, then we can be in the driver's seat. We can have agency. We can have control, set up our own guardrails of how we can use it to our ultimate benefit. And I do think if we use social media with intention, then we can actually see people offline who we meet safely online. Yeah. Let's say there's a group that we are now joining. If at some point a group can then go meet for coffee, in-person connections when you could see people eye to eye, face to face, hear their voices, not just read their words, you're going to hopefully build a more enduring relationship.
I love that because I definitely have been, I think, a beneficiary of exactly what you're talking about. I've joined women's mastermind groups or business things where we meet online for a while and then we get to do a retreat and be able to be together in person. And I think in that way, there's no question that those in-person moments are so meaningful. And I think the connections can be created and become so much deeper once we're able to do the hybrid of both.
But let's talk about why that's so important and how it's really upon the user to make those choices. No one's going to come knocking on your door, rolling out the red carpet and say, come, get off the screen, come join us in person. You really have to make the decision.
Yes.
That forging these connections is so important to you that you're willing to get up and get out. Because outside your front door, that is where all the friends are. Yeah. That is where the relationships are living and breathing and potentially there for you to tap into. They're not going to come to you on the couch. And that's a tough lesson to learn sometimes.
Yes.
Because we can all be passive. But what I think this conversation requires when we're talking about connections and this epidemic of loneliness is some self-reflection.
Of course.
Is it more important to me to start building these bonds? And if it is, I need to leave and extricate myself and start meeting people in real life. And that's where the real sweet spot is. Yeah. In real life is where the real wonderful connections can start blooming.
Yes. And I imagine to that point, I love that you said it requires accountability. Almost going back to the metaphor that you had, the chocolate cake, right? Like you ultimately have to be the one to make the decision to say, I'm not going to have this giant. It's super hard.
Yes.
And especially when we talk about this idea, the prevalence of social media, internet connection, the usage of our devices, and the way that has shifted post-COVID for work, for all of those things, it's a challenge in a way to say, like, there has to be a decision, it sounds like, is what you're saying, to say, like, I'm going to put this down and then go out and try to do the things in real life.
It is like any habit. So let's say you go to a doctor and they say, you know what, you really need to exercise more. You need to cultivate the habit of doing more yoga. You need to go for a run. Whatever that is to move your body in a way that feels right for you. And I think in the same way, we need to develop the habit that our connections are really important for our health. So we became very familiar with our physical health requirements.
Yes.
Over time, we have broken that taboo of mental health. We're much more willing to talk about going to a therapist. It's not quite as an off topic that you might avoid. We're much more comfortable talking about it. So you have physical health, mental health, and now what I want to talk about is social health. Yeah. What is your social health like? Are we paying attention to it? Because if we don't, what the Surgeon General has said, it contributes to cardiovascular disease. It can be as dangerous and life-shortening as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. It can lead to depression and anxiety, a whole host of issues, dementia.
Sure.
So we're not talking about a soft problem.
Right.
We're talking about a problem, this disconnection, this feeling of isolation is causing major problems.
Yeah.
But the great news is that we have the ability to control for it, and that's what we're talking about.
And I love that you brought all of that up because the social connection, the social health piece is a part of this whole puzzle, right? It affects literally our physical health. It affects literally our mental health, which, to your point, are things that feel more familiar at this stage. Like, we're aware of things that we can do. And I think it becomes, if someone says you need to exercise more, you're like, okay, of course I need to do that. That affects my cardiovascular health. But starting to have the conversation around your social connections also affect your cardiovascular health. So we can have the control over, just like we can start exercising, starting to be mindful about forming those social connections as well.
There's a whole movement that's really, the epicenter is in the UK, where they're talking about social prescribing, having doctors be on the front line to work with the community to say, you know what, I'm going to write a prescription. You need to go for a walk. You need to go to the museum. You need to have art and culture and friendships. This is going to be a part of how we're going to tackle whatever it is that brought you to the physician's office.
Yeah.
So this is a movement that's underway. It's called social prescribing. There's little bubbles of it coming up in the United States. It's really exciting to have this kind of be more a part of our conversation, and it's growing.
Absolutely.
It's like coming.
Yeah.
This conversation is becoming much more urgent. It is timely. We need to pay attention to it.
Yes, absolutely. So that brings me to a really important question. In your book with Dr. Ruth on the joy of connection, which is also some of the stuff that you're speaking about in the course that you've developed for us at YogaRenew, you really start to lay out some actionable strategies that people can use to start to do this work, to formulate these connections. And what I love is, initially, like, it doesn't have to be complicated, it seems like. Could you talk to me about some of the key strategies or some of the simplest ones that you find to be the most effective to start to build these connections and really tackle this problem for people?
I'm so glad that you asked me that question, because most of these suggestions, opportunities don't even cost a dime. So, for example, I'm going to give you just one idea.
Yeah.
Be curious about other people. This is about beginning with yourself, even before you leave that apartment door, before you leave your home to go make connections. Begin within is what I like to say. Do some analysis of how you are showing up in social connection circles. Here's what I mean by this. If we constantly talk about ourselves, our children, how great our careers are going, and we don't pause even for a second to ask our friends or a potential romantic partner how life is going for them, if it's all about us, it's really hard for that other person to have an opportunity to form a connection with you. It can also show up in another way, which is that if you are also sharing, but let's say you're keeping it really light, you're keeping it really superficial, everything is always great, nothing is ever wrong, you're not throwing meat into the conversation. There's nothing for that other person to kind of chew on and say, you know what, I relate to that.
Yeah.
And so I like to say, begin within. Analyze how you are actually showing up for other people. No one likes to be talked at.
Right.
No one likes to have you share constantly without kind of begging for information about what's going on in their life. And of course, you just want to pause and give somebody else a chance to crow about what's going on with them and their families too. Here's another example. Let's say you're telling a friend over coffee that you have, this wonderful work project going on, and they come back with a part of the conversation, oh, I'm so excited for my vacation. And they start telling you where they're going. And let's say they say Paris, I'm going to Paris for vacation. And your first reaction is to say, oh yeah, I remember when I went to Paris. Here's what I did. Here's what I saw. You can see how that just snuffs out the enthusiasm from that other person. So I know it's hard. I know it's a bit of tough love, but in a conversation about connection, we really must begin within.
So it sounds like really a key piece of this connection is the active listening component, and really taking the time to invite people to share their story. to be vulnerable with sharing your own, going deeper, the vulnerability required to share how you truly feel, but then also creating the space for people to be vulnerable in return.
I think if we keep things just too light too often, there's no entry point for a more meaningful connection. Now, I don't want to freak people out and say you've got to go reveal your innermost secrets in order to have like connections. Because what research actually shows is that even the most light conversations can give us a sense of belonging. And what I mean by that is this. Let's say in your neighborhood, you end up going to the same coffee shop every day or the same dry cleaner, but your AirPods are always in.
Yeah.
If you're not even saying hello or good morning or allowing somebody else to greet you in return, you're really isolating yourself in a bit of a bubble. And so even these little greetings, these little overtures that make us feel a part of something, a part of a neighborhood, a part of community, that also is really important. And that's not about going deep. So I don't want to freak people out. There's a willingness to go there with a few people, one or two. That's all you need. One or two really good, deep connections. The rest can be lighter, but allowing yourself to crack yourself open to those little relationships in your neighborhood can give you a sense of being rooted. And that's really important too.
Yeah. One of the things that I do at the start of any of my yoga classes that I've done for many years is I introduce myself, hello, welcome, and then I say, everybody turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself and say hi. And it's so interesting. People are mostly used to it now who take my class regularly, but you can always see someone, it's their first time in my class. There's this pause for a moment where people are like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to turn and introduce myself. But you can feel the collective shift in the room after that space is broken, where they're given permission to say like, hi, my name is Kate, right? And the whole room, it's almost like this little bit of an exhale, because I think it creates that space where people become more comfortable just by being able to create community.
Well, think about, and it's not our fault necessarily that we are feeling perhaps so closed off these days. Just think about this scenario. On our phones, we have the apps. We don't even have to go to the grocery store anymore, right? You can have your groceries delivered. Even if you run out of a hammer or a nail and you want to get that delivered, of course, you can just call.
And you don't have to see the delivery person.
And you don't even have to see the delivery. And so my point is we are so much more hyper independent than we have ever needed to be or wanted to be. And what that does, whether or not we're realizing it or not in practice, is that we are lessening the numbers. We are decreasing the number of opportunities where we talk to people, where we see them one-on-one. So instead of it being a natural occurrence to speak with people, to run into them at the grocery store, to have that neighborly chit-chat, sometimes we need to actually remember those are opportunities for connection. So maybe one day a week, don't just order in dinner. Maybe force yourself to go to your local hangout, because you might run into people that you might want to spend some time with. So I think we've become hyper individualized because of technology. So we have to purposely extract ourselves to seek the in-person opportunity. And it's like, if you run out of eggs and you're making a cake, maybe instead of, putting off the baking, just go ask a neighbor, potentially. Do you have an extra egg? It's really hard. It seems so odd to do these days. It almost feels weird.
Yes.
It feels like we're so not used to even asking for help anymore. But you know what? If we ask for help, one day, perhaps our friends and our neighbors will ask us for help too.
One of the things about that too, you say it almost feels weird. There's a bravery or a courage that it almost seems like it has to incur in order to do that, right? To take that first step, to be the person to say hi first. One of the things that you talk about is this idea of confidence, self-confidence playing a key role in social relationships and connection. Is that kind of what you're talking about? This idea that nowadays it's become sort of weird to be the person to take that first step. So there requires some inner level of confidence because there is a like, is this going to be received well, or are people going to think that I'm weird for trying to do this? Could you speak about that?
Yeah, listen, rejection happens in every part of our lives, right? So you apply for jobs, you're going to get rejected. You want to have a deepening romantic relationship, it's not always going to work out. So it's a matter of like a numbers game. Put yourself out there. Not every neighbor is going to respond positively, but if one does, you have now rebalanced the scales a little bit more into your social connection favor level. And that's a great thing. But another way to think about our confidence too is that when we start retreating, when we start pulling back from being more social, what also happens is that we start feeling worse about ourselves. We don't feel like we have enough to offer. And then it becomes cyclical. If we don't have enough to offer, then we're sure not going to go out because we're going to feel kind of awkward in a social setting. And so what I think is a great tool to start building our self-confidence is perhaps volunteering. When you volunteer in whatever way that you want to volunteer, what the research shows is that our sense of self-esteem increases because we know what we're contributing. We're giving something of value. We can see by somebody else's reaction to us that we are helping them. And when we start feeling better about ourselves, guess what? We're going to want to engage more. So I say volunteer, but not just volunteer with intention. And so what I mean by this is, I think it's really important when you choose a volunteer activity to be very judicious in your selection. And here's what I mean by this. If you volunteer here and you volunteer there and you spread yourself too thin, what's going to happen is that you're not going to avail yourself to seeing the same people again and again and again. And with consistency of seeing the same people, let's say every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, you're going to start seeing the same people. That level of time and time again will hopefully give birth to the opportunity to deepen connections. When we volunteer here, volunteer there, we don't really show up with, intentionality. Those relationships, they're not going to be solid. And so I say volunteer, pick one activity, 2 at the most that means something to you, and go for that.
The idea of volunteering and doing it with intentionality, what I think is so special about that is there's an authenticity to it then, right? It's connecting with people who you also share similarities with. If it's the same people that you're seeing all the time, you have something in common then, which helps to create that connection.
If you don't like gardening, then don't go volunteer for the local gardening club. If you don't like to get dirty, then a trail cleanup is not going to be for you. Again, going back to our conversation about really doing some beginning by looking at yourself, by seeing your reflection in the mirror. Who are you? How do you want to show up? Maybe you like reading to kids. Maybe that's who you are. I think it's really important to decide what are the activities that you like, what are you good at, what brings you joy, not what brings your friend joy, not what brings your partner joy, not what brings your neighbor joy. What do you like to do? Follow your own, what I call your connections compass. Go where your needs are fulfilled. Volunteer in that environment. You're more likely to meet your people. Go with consistency. That's the cherry on top. Go with consistency, and you'll hopefully deepen your connections.
Really what you're describing, it's this initial understanding and connection to yourself, right? What do I like? Who am I? What do I love? What brings me joy? Seeking those individual connections after that there might be some commonality or similarity. But that takes us to naturally what we've talked about too, is this idea of, other than just one-on-one personal relationships, connection to community in your neighborhoods, in your professional life, all of that. And that is something that you talk about for our course, as well as this idea of community. And I think, especially with YogaRenew, that's so much is what we're trying to create in a yoga setting, right? It's this connection to myself. I have my individual practice, but also I'm doing it in community with other people. It sounds like that's all really, for lack of a better way to say it, that's all connected. It starts with the self, then there's the one-to-one, but that all gets built in this larger environment of creating connections within our communities. Would that be right to say?
You've said it so well, and that's why I wanted to partner with YogaRenew. I see what you are building. I see what you are growing in terms of community, and it's so important. However, you can build it, but will they come? They're only going to come, meaning you're only going to come if you raise your hand and show up. And I think that's really important. And so if there was one takeaway from our conversation today, it's really about paying attention to your own need, pausing long enough to even evaluate what that is. That means maybe giving yourself space to not stream a show one night, maybe not be on your phone one night, giving yourself just some time either on the mat or off the mat to give yourself some space to reflect. And in that reflection comes this amazing opportunity. What do I want my life to be like? And what I would hope from this course is that we are becoming more familiar with the vocabulary of social isolation. That if we can name it, we can fix it. And if we can fix it, we will feel stronger. And guess what? We're actually going to live longer.
Which is the goal, right?
Which is the goal. Which is the goal. So we've talked about physical health, mental health. I think it's really important that we are having this conversation about social health.
And I think the work that you're doing and what you're sharing, the other piece of this is we're talking, right, this loneliness epidemic that we're facing, but there's also this piece of it feels lonely to feel lonely. Like you feel, you know what I mean? Like is it just me? Why do I feel this way? Everybody else, the perception at least, the highlight reel on social media is, oh, look at all these people doing all of these things. They're at this event when really that's like the smallest clip in somebody's life. They're showing the best part of their day. And then we're perceiving, oh, but I'm not doing that. I'm feeling lonely. I feel lonely in my loneliness. And it's this ongoing cycle. And I think what you're talking about and bringing light to is it's normal. It's happening everywhere. These conversations about many people feel lonely and we have to feel empowered to overcome that. It starts with ourselves by making the choice to build those connections. And it's like a muscle, it sounds like, that we have to exercise a bit. Like it gets easier with practice. The confidence grows with practice. The ability to say, okay, that connection didn't work so well, but I'm still okay. So let me try again. But it takes effort to be able to do that.
Well, let's be real. What you're talking about, I think, is about stigma. And shame. And in my work, I've hardly met a single person who wants to stand up in public and raise their hand and say, I'm lonely. They don't want to admit out loud that they don't have either enough friends for them, the right friends for them, friends that they can call at 2:00 in the morning. We started by talking about junk friends, which is a term that I'm cribbing and borrowing, which I love. The way you can measure, I think, the level of friendship or how good your romantic relationship is or how strong your relationship is with, we haven't talked about family, with siblings. When you go on vacation, who's changing your cat litter? Who's coming over to water the plants? Who are you calling at 2 a.m. when you're having a panic attack? If there's one person who you can rely on to change the cat litter when you go on vacation, I think you're doing pretty good. So I don't want to put it out there that we need to have a large group of the best friends. It's okay. The Surgeon General has said 1 or 2.
Which feels manageable.
Those that you can really rely on. So we can lower the pressure a little bit. But I think what you're talking about is shame and stigma. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can give oxygen to this conversation, the more we can help solve for it.
Absolutely. And it's so important, I think, to break that stigma, to remove that shame, because it's only in doing that that people can then take the steps forward to resolve the issue for themselves, but then also there's connection in being able to say that I'm struggling with that loneliness too. And I think going back to what you said, where in the beginning of our conversation, this idea of being a little bit more open to invite somebody in. Sometimes it can be like, okay, I'm feeling lonely. Likely this person might also be feeling a little lonely too. Can I take the first step to help bridge that gap and build that connection for both of us, really?
I would like to bring up something else.
Yes,
if you don't mind.
I would love that.
Which is the necessity to cut out the fat.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if you have been surrounded by the same friend group, or if you're with a partner that is no longer serving you, and maybe even hurting you, I'm not saying stick.
Right.
I think there is power in severing ties.
Yeah.
So I am not advocating for connection at all cost. I'm talking about connection with the people who bring you joy and who make you feel valued and seen. Sometimes we can feel the most lonely. Let's say we're in a marriage. We're supposed to be happy. There's expectations of joy. There's the desire to be seen and valued. And if we are not, that can feel even worse than being single.
Yeah.
So I just want to set the expectation that going forward, it's not just about collection.
Yes.
It's not about quantity. It can also be about letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to beginning within, what will make you feel the most strong to forge and maintain and nurture the kinds of connections that'll make you feel fulfilled and satisfied.
Yeah. And I imagine that's different for each person, which goes back to this idea of needing to define that for yourself, right? And having that open communication in those conversations. For your neighbor, even for a friend, like they might need a few more personal relationships in order to feel fulfilled. People are more extroverted, more introverted, whatever that looks like, but being okay with defining that for you as an individual and then doing the things that you need to do to create that.
I love that you brought that up, by the way, is that we need community. Mm-hmm. We need neighbors. We need work friends. We need neighbor friends. Not every person can do everything for you.
Right.
So really connections are about, you talk about diversifying your assets, let's say your investments. You need to diversify your connections to make sure that you're not leaving it all in one pocket. You want to make sure that you're getting what you need from different avenues. And that's a really important lesson. I think that not every person can do everything for you all the time.
Yes.
And you got to pay attention of where you're getting what you need from which resources.
So important. My husband sometimes will say to me, he's like, this is something you should call a girlfriend for. And I'm like, you're right. And it's true. Like there's certain things, and I love that he's able to sometimes say that, where I'm like, yeah, you're not interested in this. And that's okay. And
that's okay.
And it doesn't mean that he's not interested in so many things, but there are those conversations, those interests that other people have to serve for you, and that seeking those out, if it's something that you need, we could never depend on one person to give all of us. It's too much pressure for someone.
Let's also be okay with change.
Yes.
My husband and I met, we were teenagers, and we're not teenagers anymore. We've almost been married 30 years. And I would say in a long-term relationship, things are not the same.
Yes.
I am thankfully not the same person I was when we met. And so there's an evolution even with a relationship that works.
Yes.
And so it's a matter of being mindful that things evolve. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And so what are your needs now versus what your needs were before? And being able to shift, I think, is another key component to building connections.
And to allowing the other people to shift, right? And I think that goes back to the stuff that you had first initially brought up, this idea of being a better active listener, being curious. So those long term connections that you have to continue to say, hey, what are you interested in now? Is there a new piece of you that's come forward, and how can I learn about that and continue to be there and also serve as a good partner, a good friend, a good family member to the people that we love and feel connected to too.
You know what's a good tip? I'm just going to put this out there.
Yeah.
So we all have our phones. If someone mentions something to you, like a friend says, I'm going for a big job interview next week, why don't you write that down in your phone as a reminder? So then you can text your friend next week, hey, how did it go?
Yeah.
Let's say your friend lost their mom, and you may not remember the anniversary of your friend's mother's death, but your friend will remember.
Yes.
And you know what else your friend will remember? They'll remember that you remembered. And so why don't you write that date down in your calendar as an annual reminder, so you can always text your friend, hey, I'm thinking about you today. Again, we can use technology to really provide the scaffolding for our relationships. But again, it takes that proactive nature to want to use it to deepen our connections, but we can use technology. Yes. And it's at our fingertips.
I'm going to start doing that, treating those as important as a meeting, right? Because really at the end of the day, that is where the importance lies.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Oh, so good. Okay. So when it comes to these relationships that we're talking about now, not just, or maybe to the community ones, but to partners, to family members, to very close friends that we've had for a long time, what are some of the key things that you can share with us about preventing those relationships from fading, right? This idea of they do change, we do evolve, but are there things to look out for or habits that we can form to really work this relationship muscle a bit and ensure that we're doing our part as individuals to help our connections, our people feel seen, so that we can, because it's really that dual back and forth, right? We want to feel seen, but in order to do that, we also need to see other people.
This is going to be an interesting response. I think sometimes, and we talk about this in the book, The Joy of Connections, sometimes we stop inviting people over, including family, because we're just so sick and tired of hosting all the time, that we feel burdened by always being the one to extend invitations.
Yeah.
And what Dr. Ruth Westheimer reminded me is that your goal at the end of the day is not reciprocity. Your goal at the end of the day is spending time with the people who will make your life bigger, stronger, more full of love. And because we will actually never know why a family member or a friend doesn't return the invitation, maybe they're embarrassed by the size of their home.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as neat or clean as they would prefer. Maybe they've lost their job and didn't want to tell you. And since we will never know why somebody doesn't feel comfortable opening their door, we can't have this invisible ledger in our head that says, you know what, I'm done.
Yeah.
Because that actually closes the door for you.
Right.
And so I think the idea of having as much of an open door, a willingness to host because you want to have these connections, I say continue.
Yeah.
And don't wait for the return invite.
I think that's so important. And from, one of the things that we talk about in yoga all the time is this idea of the ego and not living life from a place of ego, trying to remove that so that we can show up and be present and there for other people. And I think this relates to that a lot because listen, the ego exists, right? That's part of the human experience. But so often when we don't receive that reciprocal invite, it becomes about us. Oh, my feelings are hurt. This person's doing this to me. They don't care about me. When it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is we don't know the reason. We don't know what the story is. And how can we remove some of the ego and say, this probably actually isn't about me.
Yes.
It's probably about them. And that might be the time to show up even more, right? When somebody isn't the one reaching out, isn't the one calling, why is that? And do they need that invitation even more than those that have that simple reciprocity?
I love that. And after you host again and again, if you need time for self-care, then just go do some more yoga or go do some more journaling, or perhaps meditate. You can take care of yourself in other ways besides saying enough.
Yeah.
Because once you say enough, you have closed off opportunity for yourself.
Yeah.
And so that is just one thing I wanted to share, because I think too often we start having this, the scales of justice.
Yeah.
And I don't think necessarily they belong in this conversation about friends and family and who comes over and when. Your goal is connection.
Yeah. Or even being able to say to someone, hey, why didn't you invite me? It hurts my feelings that it seems like I'm always inviting you. You haven't reached out to call to me. Why is that? Even just ask back to that curiosity piece of giving people the invitation and the space and the vulnerability to the opportunity to connect. Hey, my feelings are hurt. This is how this made me feel. Because they might not recognize or know. And usually I think when you're able to say that, it gives somebody else the space to be able to connect back in a way to understand where you're coming from too.
I love that. You know, maybe you accidentally hurt someone's feelings,
right,
and they don't really want to have conflict. They don't want to really bring it up. Some people are, as we know, are conflict avoidant.
Yes.
And so I'm not saying for you to bring it up to like spark, you know, a fight. You want to bring it up so you can clear the air and hopefully deepen your relationship. And so I love that you just mentioned that.
So important. I'd like to shift to now really talking about all of this work. What I love about it is I think it is so aligned with the basic philosophies of yoga and the practice of yoga. And so much of our audience, that's the language, right, that a lot of them speak to, where it's this personal practice about connection to self, understanding the self, so that we can show up and connect to others, that we can show up and connect to community. I'd love for you to speak just a bit more. What are the things that you're most excited about this course to share with our community, with our audience? Because I think it goes so hand in hand with people who practice yoga. It's like speaking our language, I think.
Well, listen, I love yoga so much. And so this is why this feels so authentic and meaningful. So I am so grateful to have this chance to be in community with you. And I feel that we are on the same page. If you remember, I talked about begin within. And the one question that I got so often on my book tour for the Joy of Connections is this level of disbelief that I would be talking about self-reflection in a conversation about connections with other people. It seems to be like you can't hold these two truths at the same time. And I think the power of yoga, of course, is exactly what you just described. You are within. You are centering yourself. You are understanding what your needs are. So when you leave the studio or you leave your mat at home, you can go out and crack yourself open to other opportunity. And that's really the same message. The first chapter in the Joy of Connection is self.
Yeah.
And so we're on the same page. And I feel like the relationship circle is big. It doesn't have to be small. And you can form relationships in your neighborhood, down the hall, in a yoga studio, at work, if you work in a corporate environment, at home with your children, if you don't have children, with your nieces and your nephews. There are connections that you can choose to deepen. And it's just a matter of like turning the dial, turning up the heat in those relationships that bring you the most pleasure. And by the way, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and turn down the heat for those relationships that are no longer serving you.
Yeah.
And it's in that balance when you kind of do the abacus, when you do the measuring, that you can decide, this is my new circle.
Yeah.
This is the circle of my choosing. It's with authenticity. It's with thought and care and curation. And when you think and you curate, there's that level of intentionality, which we also talked about. So it's okay to bring agency to not only our workouts, it's okay to bring agency not just to our careers and the businesses, let's say, we are building. It's okay to bring agency to our most intimate relationships. And I think that's the key.
Yeah. Allison, this has been the most wonderful conversation. I am personally so excited for the course that you're bringing to us. I want to thank you deeply for the work that you're doing, the conversations you're leading, because they are so incredibly important. And I thank you for your time talking with me today. This was such a gift.
It's been such a gift for me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.